Hey everybody, in today's video we're going to add this nice little spike dummy so that we can start building and implementing a way for our player to take damage. And so just like you can see here, the player takes damage, it affects its health, and we'll make it so that in the future our player can die. Hi, my name is Michael. Join me as we build an epic Metroidvania game in Godot 4 using GD script. This is the Metroidvania Forge. All right, so let's talk about this a little bit more in depth. So obviously we've been building up to this point where we have the ability for our player to attack and, destroy things. And now we're going to make it so that the combat or the damage goes the other way and so that it affects the player. So just like we see with the spike dummy here, it hits the player, it causes damage. We've got, a little audio playback as well as the screen shake. So we'll be implementing those. And it's going to be pretty straightforward to tie it into our player HUD because we've already kind of considered how that works as we built out the HUD in the previous chapters. As we build this, though, I just want to point out how some of this will work. We're going to be building it. Let's look at this new spike dummy. You can see here I've got a hazard area. This is just a modified version of our attack area. Okay, so it's a really simple script that just extends the attack area, but makes it so that it's always active. So we don't have to activate and deactivate the attack area to do damage to a player on these. So this is going to be really useful for environmental hazards or things that the player can bump into, which honestly is probably going to be most of our enemies as well, right? I mean, if the player walks into a slime or a zombie, then the player should probably just take damage. But also we'll be building in all the things that we need. So you can see our player is going to have a damage area integrated that's going to have both a crouch and a standing collision shape. And these are going to be tied to the collision shapes for our regular character controller or character body. We'll have the new take damage state. I'm going to show an example of how we can do audio straight from the player here because I realize we haven't really done that. This isn't necessarily my preferred way of doing it here, but it is an easy and acceptable way to play back audio. And I just noticed in my overview here, I never set the bus on this. It should be on sound effect. Important. Something you don't have to consider if you do use the audio system that we built in the past, right? Because that's handled for us. As you work through this, it's going to be pretty straightforward, but obviously we're covering kind of two features in one as we're building a spike dummy and then we're building the player state. So hopefully it's a good digestible video for you and it covers all the things that you need to get started. One thing I will mention before we get in is we're going to be approaching this new take damage state in a unique way, where in the past we've triggered all of our state transitions based on player inputs or actions. Now what we're doing is we're taking a state that needs to be entered and initialized by kind of an external event where the player takes damage. And so we'll look at how we can do that. And there's several ways we could approach that. And our state machine and our player setup will support a few out of the box. But I hope that you look forward to seeing how I implement that here. And it should give you ideas on how you can do the same in the future for other states. So as we get started, we'll begin with the spike dummy. Okay, so the first thing I want to do before we build the player stun state is introduce one additional way to kind of damage the player. And the reason I want to do this is because obviously for testing purposes, it's nice to have something fun and easy to use, but also because we've built the attack area, which is something that is designed to be activated for a brief period of time. But obviously some of our entities in the game world, whether that be our enemies or something like spikes that you can run into, they need to always be active. And so we'll create a very quick iteration of the attack area and we'll assign it to a spike dummy that we'll use. Okay, so let's start by creating the spike dummy. And right now I've got this test dummy here. And if we look at him, and I'm going to go ahead and just show this in the file system, I'm actually going to start by creating a copy of the test dummy, and we'll just call it spike dummy. So I'll come down here, right click, and say duplicate. There we go, spike dummy. And let's just open this up. Now that we've created a copy of this scene, we can, I'm going to change the name of the root as well, but we can just make some adjustments to how this works in here. Now, the first thing I'm going to do is come to the body sprite, and I'm going to, take this sprite atlas and just adjust the region because obviously we want this spike area to be what this dummy displays, which is a little bit smaller. Okay, I'm going to go ahead and just select this and close. And we do need to, because it's smaller, just drag this down a couple notches. And you're noticing probably the same thing I am. It's offset by 1 pixel. 2 ways to avoid that are to edit the region and make it an even number of pixels. So just drag it up by 1. That should fix it. There we go. Or you could also go to the offset and turn off centered, or give it a half a pixel offset or something like that. Okay. But there we go. Essentially what's happening though, right, is if it's centered and it's an odd number of pixels, then the origin of that is going to be in between pixels instead of, or it's going to be in the middle of a pixel instead of in between 2 pixels. Okay, so that's just a weird thing that happens when you have centered turned on by default. Okay, so this is this little spike dummy. I'm going to go ahead and save this, and let's just drop one into the playground and make sure that it works. And of course that put it up there. I'm going to go ahead and just drag it over here to the left. Actually, no, let's put it here to the right. We'll just stick it really close to us. Okay. So this should have the same behavior, as our dummy currently, right? And what we're going to do is add this hazard area to it so that it can also damage the player in return. And one other thing that I want to do is just go into my spike dummy, and we've got the same script attached for the wobble that we used for our spike dummy in the last video. So I just want to adjust this a little bit because I want this one to be a little bit bigger of a wobble so that if you're not careful, you will hurt the player. So I'm going to increase the base wobble to 9, and the wobble speed, I'm going to also change this to 0.25, something like that. So now we'll see that when we hit this, it's going to swing in a larger area. Yeah, and a little bit slower. So if you're standing right next to it and you hit it, then ideally what will happen is the player will maybe get hit by the spike area, okay? So just some quick work there with that spike dummy. And then obviously the next step is going to be adding our hazard area and creating that script. Okay, so in order to create this hazard area, let's go look at the attack area script. And that was saved in our general scripts, right? So you can see I've got my attack area. You can always type in a file filter here if you want to. Let's go ahead and open this. So obviously the thing that isn't useful about this attack area is the fact that it disables itself when it's ready, right? It sets its monitorable and monitoring to false, and then it only enables it when we call the active function on it. So we're just going to make a new class that will extend attack area. So it's going to have all of the same guts, all of the same script and coding, except we'll just override it so that it's always active. So here in the scripts folder, let's just go ahead and create a new script, and we'll call it hazard area. Okay. And I'm going to go ahead and just delete everything. Let's give it an icon because we have one for this. So it'll be nice to utilize that. So just looking in my general folder for icons, you see there's a hazard area icon. So make sure you've grabbed the downloadable zip file for this chapter, which is on the itch.io page, linked in the description, of course. And then what we're going to do, we'll give it a class name of hazard area. And what we want is we want it to extend the attack area. Okay, right? Because then what that means is essentially it starts here, right? And it's got all of this code. And of course, since attack area extends area 2D, it's also got all the area 2D built in and so on. But now we've got a new type, and really all we need to do is come to our ready function like this. And anything we write in here is now going to override the ready function on the attack area. But actually there's stuff in here that's important we don't want to override. We want to keep all of this in place. We just need to change this essentially. So what we'll do, instead of overriding everything, we'll use this super command, which what this says is, okay, at this point, run everything in the ready function from the parent script that we're extending, and then we can add our own code in addition afterwards. And so what we'll do here is I'm going to just turn visible and the monitoring to true. Okay. Now visible is really just for us for debugging purposes so we can see when it's active, but the monitoring being true is what will make it so that this can actually damage the player. Okay. So that's all we need to do for this hazard area. is just that. Now, if you wanted to add other code because you had other ideas for how you want it to function, then that's fine. You can go ahead and extend it as much as you see fit. But I'm just going to come back to my spike dummy, and I'm going to add one of these hazard areas as a child of the body sprite. And I want to do that because we are rotating this body sprite, and so I want that hazard area to rotate with it as it animates. So I'm going to do a Control A, type in hazard area. And of course, it's going to need a collision shape, right? And we'll go ahead and just configure that to be a rectangle, like so. And it doesn't need to be too big. I don't know. You can make it as big or as small as you want. And I'm going to make it red so that it's obvious what it is. And there we go. Okay. I'll give that a little bit of color. Drag the alpha up a little bit. Okay, so when we look at this hazard area, it does 1 damage, and we do need to make sure that we turn on our collision appropriately. This is something I kept forgetting to do previously, but we should just put it on a layer that can damage the player. So I'm going to put it on maybe just the enemy, or maybe I guess we need to put it on the player layer, don't we? Because then it can damage the player. Okay, I think that's how we need to do it. Now, before I test this out, I'm going to go ahead and restart my project just so that that icon will take place, or will take its place here. Okay, there we go. Now we've got our hazard area icon, and let's go ahead and give this a whirl. And actually, nothing's going to happen, but we can see. What I should do is just go to my debugging and turn on visible collision shapes so we can see it. I guess I should have done that first. But we'll see that there is that red hazard area, which is enabled. Unlike our player attack, it only activates for that split second when we call that function. This one is on at all times, and it's rotating with the sprite. So that should work once we allow it to damage the player, right? Okay, so now that we've got this little thing set up that we can use to test that our player can take damage, we really need to just dive into this. So let's hop over to our player scene, and we're going to be adding a new state to our player so that it can handle when he takes damage. We'll also add a function or some functionality into our player script to also help handle taking the damage, right? And we just need to make sure that when we take damage, it connects to things like our player HUD, but that's going to be pretty straightforward. The other thing that we need to do is, obviously, our player has no area for detecting to take damage. Now, we could potentially maybe use these collision shapes here for the stand and the crouch, but what we're going to do is we want to try and keep our systems working in a uniform manner. So by that, I mean we want to use the damage area that we've built. And so let's go ahead and begin by adding a damage area. Okay, so now we've got a damage area in our player, and we need to make sure that we configure this and get this set up. Let's go ahead here, selecting our damage area, go to collision, and let's put it on the player layer. That's how we set up our spike dummy, so it's going to only damage, this spike dummy will only damage damage areas on the player layer, is how we've set that up. Obviously, if you're making a game where everybody and every entity can damage each other, then you could just put all the damage and attack areas on just layer 1 or something if you want to. But I'm trying to keep mine separate. So this is on player layer. We need some collision areas, and we've got good collision shapes for our stand and our crouch. And what I'm going to do is actually duplicate each of these and then just drag and drop them into the damage area. Okay, but then I'm going to go ahead and right click these, and I'm going to give them a unique name, and I want to actually rename them. So we'll call this one like DA stand, and this one here will be DA crouch, DA standing for damage area. Okay, that way I can easily keep track. Now, an important note on this step we just took, because we duplicated these collision shape 2Ds up here, what that means is the shape that it's referring to here is linked, okay, because they're pointing to the same resource. And so what that means is if I change, you'll notice, let's turn off the visibility of the collision stand and crouch, and we'll just keep the regular damage area stand visible, but I'm going to select collision stand, and if I change the size of this, you see it's affecting this one down here as well. So what that means is any change that we make to these collision shapes will be reflected in our damage areas, which is probably useful, right? Because that way we know that they match. And now the other thing that we have to do, and by default, this crouch is disabled and the stand is enabled. So that's fine. That's correct, because that means that we'll be toggling those. But because we've done this, because we've added this complexity of having some extra damage area collision shapes that need to change when we crouch and stand, let's go into our crouch script here, and or our crouch state, and we need to update this real quick. Actually, before we can update that script, let's go into our player, because really we keep a reference to our collision shapes here, right? So I'm just going to come in here and grab each of these and just get a reference to those. Okay, so now we've got our damage area collision shapes referenced here. And then when we come over here to crouch, now you see how we do this code here to change and enable or disable the different collision areas for our regular player. We could come in here and kind of copy this and say DA and DA. Okay, so now we're going to do the same disabling and enabling of these new collision shapes that we've got. So let's just go ahead and do the same on the exit. That way we reset them when we exit the crouch state. And we should be good there. So now what will happen is if I make these damage area shapes visible, and let's go ahead and run our project, we should see, right now we're seeing the damage collision areas. We should see that when we're standing, the taller one is enabled and blue, the crouched one is gray, meaning it's disabled, and vice versa, right? Okay, so that means you can duck, and any projectiles that will damage the player, if they fly over top of that one, they won't. So now our duck is useful for our damage, okay? So quick little bit of work we had to do outside of any new state to make sure that this damage area setup works. Okay, I want to hop into the player script again, because now that we've got these new damage areas, I want to start utilizing them. Because as you recall, I mean, I'm saying damage areas. We have two shapes, but actually only one damage area, and it will just use whichever shape or shapes are enabled, okay? But because this damage area has the damage taken signal, we just need to connect to that in our player. And since this is the place, the player script is kind of the hub of all of that, this is where I'm going to choose to implement that. So we'll come to our ready function, and we need to just set up a little bit here. Currently, we're not doing a whole lot with this, okay? So we need to introduce some things in order for this to work. We've got some hit point and max hit point variables, all right? And what I'm going to do is just make sure that we're interfacing with those as we potentially take damage. And of course, like I mentioned, we want to connect to that damage taken signal that we have. So we'll just come in here, and I'm going to just say damage area. Oh, nope. You know what? We didn't get a reference to that yet, did we? We brought in our collision things here, but let's go ahead, and I'll just bring it down here at the bottom under the attack area. Let's get a reference to our damage area. I'm going to go ahead and just make it accessible by unique name first, then drag it in. Okay, there we go. Okay, so we've got our damage area, and then back to the ready function. So we'll say damage area dot, and then we have, what is it? Damage taken dot connect. Okay, so we're going to need to connect to that on damage taken. Go ahead and copy this, and we'll just make that new function down here. We've got one other function on player healed related to our hit points. Okay, on damage taken, and if you recall, this will pass along the attack area, so we need to reference that here. And there we go. We essentially just need to do a couple things, right? When the player actually takes damage, we need to reduce our hit points. And then we're going to also emit a signal from this, which is going to help us switch states. Okay, so changing states, emitting a signal, these are going to be kind of synonymous. And actually, yeah, we'll just leave it at these two things. So the reduce hit points is pretty straightforward, actually, right? We can just say HP minus equals, and then we've got an attack areas. It's got a damage value associated with it. And then let's go ahead and create this signal real quick, because we don't really have any signals on our player yet, right? I don't think I have a signal region. Yeah. Okay. So just at the top of this script here, I'm going to make a new region. You don't have to make the region, but it's kind of nice. Okay, signals. And the only signal we're going to build right now is the damage taken signal. Just like that. Okay. Now we'll go back down to our on damage taken, and now we can emit that signal. So we'll just say damage taken dot emit. And I think this will be useful because you may want to start building other things that can respond to this. And it's nice to have a signal go out and the player not have to keep track of who needs to respond to it. The player script just has to let other potential scripts know when it's taking damage, right? So we're using that observer pattern here where things can observe this if they so choose. So that's all we need to do to get this started. But we could begin maybe by just printing a statement as well, just to test this. Player took damage. And then maybe we just print out the HP. And actually, one thing that we should also point out is if we look at HP, we already built this to have a setter function. So anytime our HP changes, it gets clamped, right? That's why I didn't add any extra code down there. Well, we're already saying, okay, HP has to remain somewhere between 0 and the maximum hit points. And likewise, we're also emitting this player health changed signal from our message bus. Okay. And if you recall behind the scenes, our player HUD is also connected to that player health change signal, so it knows to update. So theoretically, we should actually be able to see our hit points change when we walk into this. I don't know if we got everything hooked up, but well, apparently we didn't. Apparently we didn't. Okay, so let's take a look at this and let's figure out maybe where we've missed a step. And actually, you know what? I'm looking at my damage area here, and it's on layer 5. And I'm thinking, even though I was being forward-looking with my hazard area, I set it to layer 5. We actually just want it to have a mask of layer 5, right? It's checking layer 5. It doesn't need to be on layer 5. So just change that. I think that's the reason it didn't work. So let's test it again and just give it a go. Boink. Let's see. And you can see it wasn't maybe super obvious, but you'll notice up here, every time I walk into this spike, the health is changing. Okay. So I'm actually taking damage. And you can see also down here, we're printing out that the player took damage and there's the current hit points. Okay. Okay. So far, so good. Obviously, the main goal of this video is not only to take damage, but to make it feel responsive to the player. So I'm going to go ahead and just delete that print statement, and we'll get ready for the next step. Okay, looking at our player here, this is what we're going to do next. We're going to come in here to our states, our state machine setup, and just add a new node, right? These are just a regular old node. And I'm going to call this new state just take damage. You could call it something like stun. I think there's, a lot of ways we could name it, but I'm going to go ahead and do that. Give it the access by unique name. And let's go ahead and just open one of these states so I can find them real quick. I'm going to go ahead and show in file system. Okay. So down here, we've got all of our player state stuff. Let's open this root player state because we do need to introduce our new state type into this state reference section. Okay. So now we've got our take damage. This is going to have a special type here, though. It's going to be a player take damage state, which we haven't assigned that script yet. I'm doing this out of order, so that's going to break for a moment. Let's go ahead and create that. We'll create a new script here and just call it take damage. Okay. Now, because this is a player state, we can come in here. I'm going to go ahead and just take the idle, copy all of this, and then paste it. And before I save it, I want to make sure I actually change this name to player state take damage. Is that how I called it in the over here? No, I got it wrong, didn't I? Player state take damage. Okay, there we go. Now everything should be good. So I've just updated this in a couple places. We've got a class name, player state take damage, right here. We've added a reference to this new state type on our player states. Last thing we really need to do is just come down here and find our take damage and plop it onto the node in the scene tree. And there we go. Okay, so now it's a proper state, but it doesn't do what we want it to just yet because obviously we copied over all of the idle script code. So we'll have to go through and we'll have to fix that. And let's take a look at our player scene again. Let's look at the animation player and see the animations we've got here. We've got attack, crouch, idle, jump, run. We don't yet have an animation for that either. So we'll have to come back and do the animation for this when we're ready. Okay, so looking at the script for take damage, let's go ahead and clean this up a little bit. I'm going to keep this, but we're just going to change this animation that we play later. So I'm going to comment it out. And then I want to come through. We're not going to be handling any input during this state because, you know, it's like the player's not able to control himself during this brief period where he takes damage. Okay, so we're going to clear that out. Our process, let's go ahead and clear this for now, as well as our physics process. Okay, we'll actually probably do most of our coding on this one in the physics process, but you know, we'll come back to these and update them. And I'm going to have this just return null as well. We're not going to use the next state, I don't think, in this script. Okay, so we've got a fairly empty state here. And what I want to do is let's just build the export variables that we need first. And essentially what we're going to do is we're going to build a state that pushes the player backwards from the damage he took. So there needs to be some motion and some kind of velocity involved in that. And there needs to be a duration as well, because we're not going to have a duration that's based on our animation length. I guess you could if you want to, but we're going to do something different. We'll just time it with regular little timer script. And the other thing I think we want to do is we want to make it so that while the player is in this state, he's invulnerable briefly, because we don't want the player to get into a situation where he'll just get juggled between enemies indefinitely. And so that invulnerability needs to have a duration maybe that's longer than the actual state itself, but it needs to be, you know, started when he takes damage. Okay, so we'll build that in as well. But we can start with a couple variables that we can use. So we're going to need to export some things, right? So we'll have I'll just call it a move speed variable, just like we've done in other states. And we'll just set this to 100. It's going to be a slower move speed. And then we'll also have a duration for our invulnerability. So we'll just say invulnerable duration, which will also be a float. And I'm going to set it to half a second. You may want it to be longer. And actually, I guess that's it. I don't need another export variable. We do need a couple locally scoped variables. So we need like a timer, a way that we're keeping track of the time. So I'll just call this, I'm just going to call it time. And I think we can just set it to 0 by default. And then we'll also have a direction. And we'll set this equal to 1. So like we've done in the past with our particles, this is just going to be a left or right direction. Any vertical directionality can be controlled by the gravity. Okay, so we'll have just direction here. And I guess lastly, one thing that we do want to do is get our damage area and get a reference to it. Okay, because if we look at the damage area, we have built into this a make invulnerable function. So we'll be calling that to essentially implement this vulnerability or invulnerability that we have. Okay, so there we go. We've got this set up, and now we're ready to start implementing the state. Okay, this is a great time to come in and implement this animation that we need on our player. So just make sure that you've got this animation player selected so that you can see the animation panel down here. And I'm going to make a new animation. We'll call it Take Damage. And this is going to be a really straightforward animation. We'll just take our sprite and let's key a frame here. And obviously we don't want it on that first frame there, but the frame we want is frame 30, I think, on this sprite sheet. Let's take a look. There we go. Now, if you have an animation that you want to actually play through a couple frames, you can. But what I'm going to do is we're just going to play this one frame. That I only have one frame of taking damage animation. Okay, I'm going to go ahead and turn off this attack sprite here, as well as the visibility on these. Okay, so we'll have just this single frame animation, but I don't necessarily know the duration. We'll just give it a second. And so if you need to add anything in there, you can. Okay, but really it's not important. It's just important that it enters this frame essentially. Okay, so we'll save that, come back to our take damage script. And now here in our enter, we can or uncomment this animation player.play, and we'll just play the take damage animation, okay? Just like that. Now, let's go ahead and hook this up. One thing that may not be obvious just yet, but we have no way to enter this state as of yet, okay? And so I want to actually implement that now that we have our animation so that we can start testing this in the game. And so what we're going to do is we're actually going to use the init function on this. We haven't really used this a whole lot yet, but this is what happens when the state is initialized, okay? So another way to say that is this is what happens when the player state machine gets set up when the game starts or when the player is instantiated. So what we want to do, we have a reference to our damage area. So we're going to go and look at our damage area, and we're going to do the damage taken signal, and we're going to connect to that, okay? Alternatively, we could take to the player's damage taken signal. He has one as well. We're not utilizing that in this video really, but it's there in case we need it. But we'll just connect to this damage taken signal. And so we need an on damage taken function here within this script as well. And there are probably other ways we could handle this that would be perfectly acceptable. You know, you could maybe force the player state machine to change to this state from the player script or some other method. But this is how we'll do it here. So we'll just say on damage taken, and then we're going to get reference to our attack area. And then what we're going to do is something kind of unique, something that we haven't really done before. And we're going to essentially make this state responsible for knowing when it needs to become the current state. And so what we'll do is when we take damage, we're going to say player dot change state, and we're going to pass in ourself. Okay, so when this script receives this signal, we're going to say, hey, it's my turn. I'm up, right? And then what that does is it's going to override any other state that we're in. So this is kind of dangerous. You don't want to do this with all states, but because of that, right, this is going to be able to take precedence over lots of states. So if you have states that need to be invulnerable, we'll just use the invulnerability feature of our damage area probably to make sure that that happens. But otherwise, you might need to build a condition into this on damage taken to say, hey, I'm not taking damage this time. But the only other thing we'll do here in on damage taken is we'll check the position of our attack area compared to our damage area. And by our, I mean the attack area that damaged us, and we'll determine the direction. So we'll say if attack area.global position.x is less than, and we can use, I guess we could use our damage area, but we could also just use the player's global position. I think I'm going to do that. Player.global position.x. Then we know that this is the direction we want is positive. So we'll say dir equals 1.0. Okay. Because if the attack area is x is less than, it means it's to our left. So we should kind of get stunned and bumped or knocked back to the right. Else, we just add an else in here. We can say that the dir, I don't know why I put an extra space in there, dir equals -1. Okay, and there we go. So now we've detected our directionality, and this should get us into the state. Let's go ahead and just test this. At this point, we should at least see that stun animation play. Yeah, there we go. Okay, and it's totally messed up, but it's working better than it was before, or at least it's doing something, right? So there we go. We've got that set up and maybe ready to start really fleshing this out. Okay, let's talk about what else we need to do when we enter this state. Because we're playing the animation, that's good. We need to maybe do the following. We need to set our timer that we are going to use. We need to make the player invulnerable, okay? And then we can play some audio. And I think that's pretty much it for this enter state. So let's go ahead and tackle these real quick. So the timer is going to be pretty straightforward. We're going to say time equals, and then we have this. We have a couple ways, I guess, that we could handle it. We have an invulnerable duration. You know what? I'm realizing now I didn't think of a good way to do this timer, and because I've done it many ways in the past. And I'm going to go back on my word. Actually, this is I think what we're going to do. Let's look at our animation. Let's go ahead and give this take damage animation a duration. I'm going to say it's 0.3 seconds. Okay. And then what we can do here is say, let's go ahead and set our timer to the duration of that animation. So we can say player dot animation player dot current animation length. Okay. Alternatively, we could connect to the animation finished signal. That would work as well. Or you could just plug in a number. We could export a variable. There's a lot of ways we could determine this time. Okay. Now, for making the player invulnerable, that's going to be pretty straightforward because we've got our damage area. So we can say damage area dot, and then we have was it called make invulnerable? And then we could just plug in our invulnerable duration, which you'll notice that the default duration, if we don't provide one, is 1 second. What did we call it? Invulnerable duration. There we go. Yeah, so this will make us invulnerable for half a second. And in fact, what I want to do is next to test this is we'll actually adjust that and see. And then lastly, we can play some audio. I think one thing that I want to do just for the sake of demonstration for those who are newer to Godot and we haven't done this yet, in the past we've been using our global audio system to play back audio effects. We can add to our player, and in some cases this may be actually beneficial for performance. If you've got an effect that you're going to be playing a lot, the same sound effect on your player, then you might want to just use an audio stream player on your player. So let's do that here for the take damage, not because this is the best place to do it, but just because this is a good place to use this as an example. Okay, so one option would be to, like I mentioned, take our audio dot play spatial audio or play spatial sound, right? And then pass in the effect that we want to play. But we're going to just do it different for fun, just to learn something new today. So let's just go ahead and on our player, I'm going to add an audio stream player 2D. Okay. And we'll maybe give this a name instead of just audio stream player 2D. We'll call it like Hurt Audio or something like that. And then what we can do is just come in here and we can select an audio stream, and we'll go to quick load. And we have something that's called, yeah, there we go, ARG. Okay. There we go. So we can play this sound effect. And then what we'll do, there's many ways we could do this, but I think an easy way is let's just go ahead and get an on-ready reference to the Hurt Audio. And then here we can just say Hurt Audio dot play. Okay. So now, there we go. We're taking damage. We're making a sound, I should say, when we take damage. Okay. And I guess the other thing I wanted to test was the invulnerable, but because we're getting stuck in this state, we need to make it so that we get out of the state first. And what we're going to do here is we'll do this in our process function, I guess. We're just going to say time minus equals delta. Okay. Which, yeah, underscore delta, that's fine. And it's not Tim, is it? It's time. Okay, so we've got our little time variable. We'll just decrease it by the delta, and then we'll just do a check. If time is less than or equal to 0, that means we're done being stunned. And we can just maybe return the idle state, okay? So what this should do is allow us to become unstunned. Okay, there we go. And you can see that each time I run into this, I'm taking damage. One benefit of what we're doing here is because the player gets pushed away from the spike, when he re-enters it, he can take damage again. Because I don't know if you noticed earlier, but when we just stood on the spike and we didn't have any movement, well, the player wouldn't continuously take damage. One other thing, though, that's happening that might not be obvious here is that with this make invulnerable, we're actually disabling and re-enabling the process mode. And, if needed, we could come in here and disable and re-enable the collision shape. That would be one way to make sure that this reinitializes that ability to take damage. Okay. But let's go ahead and come in here to our player state, look at take damage. And I'm going to move this invulnerable duration up to 3 seconds so that it's hopefully obvious. We don't have a visual effect to show that we're invulnerable. Yeah, it's not working, is it? Because if we're invulnerable for 3 seconds, or maybe I didn't save that. Let's make sure that that's saved. Yeah, there we go. Okay. I don't know. I feel like this is a newer issue with the Godot 4.6. I'm not sure what's causing it. But you can see now for 3 seconds, I'm not taking damage. And so if we gave the player some visual feedback, like make the player sprite blink or something, then it would become really obvious that you're invulnerable, or some other effect you could add. But this is really useful for consideration when you've got a game where you don't want the player to be able to become stun locked. Okay, that's really the purpose of this invulnerable feature. And you can see right there, I can stand on this spike, and every 3 seconds when we become active again, it is going to detect that collision again. Okay, so you could see if there was no invulnerable duration and you just knocked back into another spike over here and it just like kind of sent you back and forth, you would never be able to get out of the stun state, right? So this invulnerability is really a tool to help avoid those types of circumstances. I think half a second is going to be okay for me. We may need 1 second. Really fine-tuning this is going to be something that happens through playtesting as you start building out your levels and enemies and the different obstacles you have. It'll become obvious if you need more duration here, okay? So actually, it should be apparent now that for the most part, this is working. There's only one thing that it's not doing very well, and that's that the velocity of our player is just inherited by whatever when we hit. And we don't really want that, right? We don't want to slide through the enemies. We want to get bounced back. And we did do some of the work here calculating a direction so that we could do that. We just need to come into our physics process and start manipulating our velocity, okay? So what we'll do is we're just going to say player.velocity.x equals, and then we can just use our move speed multiplied by our direction. Okay? So it's going to be just a constant velocity in a direction. If you want to tweak that, you can, but here we go. There we go. Now I get knocked back when I bump into something. And because I've got my stun duration at 0.5 and my timing for my actual stun state is at 0.3 seconds, because now, I don't know if I explained this clear enough, that change we made. Now what we're doing is we're basing the duration off of the duration of this animation, 0.3 seconds, okay? I hope I made that clear enough in this video. But obviously I can just keep running into this. But now we have a proper stun state. And in fact, something fun is you can see we can hit this thing, and when it swings back, it can bonk us in the face. And yeah, it seems like a pretty decent test of being able to make the player take damage. Okay, I'm looking at this, and there's actually a couple things that we need to improve upon. And I've turned off the debug shapes. The hit dust on our player is in an odd spot, right? It's kind of at his feet and whatnot. So we need to update that. And we also, I think we should just give it a little bit more game juice, right? So let's look at how we can correct those two things real quick. So let's go back to our player. Let's actually look at our spike dummy for this. So I'm thinking our hazard area, you see how it's down here? We're spawning the little dust things from the origin up and down of our attack and hazard areas. So what we need to do is drag this up so this origin is at the height where we want it to be, and then just reposition the collision shape. Now that's going to fix that little dust. There we go. Now it's up here where it actually hit the player, right? Boom. Okay, much better. But let's add the little bit of game juice that I mentioned. So I'm going to do one other thing. Let's go back to our player again and open this take damage state. And what we can do here is just maybe on enter. Where's enter? Let's go ahead and add a screen shake. You have to be careful with screen shake. I don't know if you want screen shake every time the player takes damage, but I think when the player takes damage, that's the most appropriate time to do screen shake as opposed to when an enemy does. And when it comes to damaging enemies, you might only want screen shake when it's like something big, you know. If you have too much screen shake, then it can be either disorienting or just so much that the player becomes numb to it. Okay, so what we'll do here is we'll do, what is it, visual effects. And then I think we just have, was it just called shake, camera shake. There we go. And I'm just going to leave the strength, that float at 1, and let's give it a test. Let's see how this feels. There we go. A little bit of screen shake. Now, if we wanted to increase this to 2, try this out. 2 feels okay, actually. I might keep that. But, you know, have some fun with that. You could even make that an export variable if you want, or something along those lines to really tie in, you know, to make it easier for you to manipulate. Other fun things you could consider doing are like making the screen shake proportional to how much hit points the player loses or something. I don't know. There's all sorts of fun things you could do with that, right? But I'm going to leave that up to you guys to experiment with. Okay, one other bit of cleanup. And this is something that isn't necessarily related to this state, but something we can address here. I'm going to just run this again. You'll notice our hit point bar is big until we take damage or something, right? And then it updates. Because we have just a minor flaw, and that is that we're relying on our initial, we're relying on our hit points changing to update the size of our health bar, but the hit points are never actually changing when we just start a game. Okay, so what we can do is just on the ready function, if we want to, in here, we could just come in and say HP equals max HP, something like that. And that should be enough to kick this into gear. There we go. Now our hit point bar is the proper size, and that's feeling better to me. Okay. Well, there we have it. That's the video for today. So we've managed to kind of tie multiple things together here, right? We've got our player HUD now working with our player being able to take damage using the new damage area, as well as this new hazard area that we've built today. And so I hope that these things have introduced you to some good new concepts, as well as new ways to work with and initialize the different states that are on our player state machine. No doubt you are probably starting to think of other ways that you can trigger a player state change. Okay, and so have fun with that if you want to. As part of your homework, if you would like, obviously you've noticed that we have no player death. Let me go ahead and just run into this spike for a minute. Okay, we're at 0 hit points now, and still not dying, right? So the upcoming video will be building that player death state. So what your homework is to look at our take damage code and figure out how you might determine that and how you might transition to the death state. You could even build that if you want to. So I've even got the frames in there for that death animation if you want to do that. But give that a whirl, and then in the next video, I'll show you my approach to implementing the death state as well as building a game over screen. And so we'll have the ability for the player to have a full life cycle and, you know, kick back to the title screen and all that kind of stuff. Go ahead and drop any comments. Please give the video a like if you found it useful. That's really important. And YouTube's been really harsh on long form content lately, so I do appreciate the people who do engage with me. It does help my channel a lot. So this is, I don't know if it's a cry for help, but I am just expressing my gratitude to those of you who do engage with me, because it's very meaningful. And for those who are new, go ahead and subscribe so that you can see when the next video comes out. Again, thank you for watching, and as always, we'll see you next time.